it's fascinating to see, if I'm not talking about the compounds themselves, there is a lot of different types of filler that we're seeing in a lot of powders and pills and you name it.
Did you guys see the Woodstock 99
Yes.
doco?
Oh my
Yes.
God. I watched that and Fire Festival and I got chills because I was like, oh, this could be what happens if I don't do my job well.
That documentary didn't dive into what harm reduction measures were in place for the original 69 Woodstock.
Right.
And there were some rough things going on then as well, but there was also, the beginnings of psychedelic harm reduction, and I think that was being maybe delivered by Hell's Angels. But
my God.
yeah,
Really?
just a different time, a different place. The death toll from overdose is exceeding the road toll. We do need
In
harm
Australia,
reduction.
yeah.
Yeah, we do need it. I just think that in Australia we have a lot of regulation about everything.
Standing on stage or behind stage sometimes and just looking out at the crowd, you sort of go, right, the drug of choice this evening is not primarily alcohol. And that's, as a promoter, that's really scary. Especially for me, when I hadn't had a lot to do with harm minimization, harm reduction, I was like, wow, this is terrifying.
All right, and we are live. Welcome to Mustard Flats for another episode. We got a couple of guests in today who have been working on the Canberra pill testing site, and we caught up with Mitch for a little doco on a bit of behind the scenes of what goes on there. So it's going to be very cool to catch up with Mitch and Steph today. Steph is also working there and a part of Dance Wise down in Melbourne and up in Canberra for the launch of this studio, this clinic. So great to have you guys in. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks.
Thank you. And we've got to thank our sponsors and supporters of the channel, Capital Brewing, for their ongoing support. Thank you. So guys, how's the nearly a month in? How's it all going at the clinic?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. I'm still so excited every time I go to work, which is a nice feeling.
Yeah, it's been smooth, pretty easy. No hiccups so far, touch wood.
Amazing. Yeah, it's very cool to see. And thank you again, Mitch, for showing us around the other day.
My pleasure, my friend.
Yeah, really interesting to get your insights, and we'll hopefully get a bit more out today. And we've got a lot of questions coming in on the DMs. So if you are watching and want to know anything about the pill testing, please let us know. And there's a link in the comments there if you want to do it anonymously. But first, before we get too deep into that, how did you guys kind of end up in the harm minimisation area? What was the catalyst for that, in a way?
For me, it's music. So I run a party crew along with a bunch of mates called Canberra House Social. But before that, I've been DJing around town probably for the better part of 15 years now. So I've been around drugs and stuff like that for ages. And I never really thought about the harm reduction for the first part of my life. It didn't even cross my mind. And it was only once weird stuff started happening where people were having adverse effects to stuff when we were partying that made me go, I don't know enough about this stuff. So that sort of started my journey of self-discovery. So I was trying to educate myself, but eventually I moved up to Sydney. I did a music degree. And while I was doing that, I was like, Canberra doesn't have anything to support us. Because in New South Wales and Vic, there's Dance Wise, and seeing what Dance Wise did, I think at Strawberry the first time, and then after that at Subsonic, I was like, oh my God, why is there not something like that in Canberra? And then for me, I called CHAMA, my now work, and was like, hey, let's do something. Let's work together with the music industry and the harm reduction sort of space, and let's start working on that stuff. And that sort of led me down this weird path to here. Moved from Sydney back to Canberra and started working at CHAMA. But yeah, it's been a long thing. Like I think it's probably everyone who does harm reduction. There's a bit of your like personal life involved in it first. Like you don't just instantaneously go and work in drug reform. Well, I haven't. It was a long thing. But yeah, it's great to be here and doing what we're doing. But yeah, I think it's always a long journey for anyone that's involved. And it might come from trauma. It might come from, seeing a mate drop or something like that. And that sort of causes you to go, hang on, maybe we can be doing this stuff a bit better.
Yeah, I can relate to Mitch's description that my introduction to harm reduction was kind of staggered as well. Started going to events and things in my mid-teens, and you're just around alcohol and other drugs, and you just become aware of it. And harm reduction at first is just like common sense and like looking after your mates, and then you might realize that there's like a whole lot more to it, and it's about social justice. I studied law and was always passionate about social justice, and it wasn't until I'd been working in like community services for nearly 10 years that I had like an intro into harm reduction. When I was traveling, I was in New York, and I had the opportunity to volunteer at a needle and syringe program. And just the fact that it's a really cost-effective and human rights focused approach to drug policy made me think, why don't we do that more regularly? And then you realize all the politics and the discrimination involved. And knowing that there is festival-specific harm reduction is really interesting, because you can apply all your life experiences from going to parties, and it really tailors the education and support that you can offer people.
Yeah, I think like a common theme would be festivals.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that was sort of the avenue where it first started, this pill testing thing, and you were involved with the trial in Canberra at Groove and the Move.
Yeah.
I think it was, yeah. So that was kind of the first stage, those festivals, in trialling this process.
Yeah, it's really weird to think that Canberra's like the bleeding edge of harm reduction in Australia, because obviously everyone everywhere is doing great work, but we're getting the nice things. Like, I couldn't believe when that trial went up. I didn't think that was a thing. I remember, because there was all these fights over the land, wasn't there? Like where it could be done, if I remember correctly. It was
there was back and forth about a number of different things for many years.
Yeah, I can imagine. Because, there was the whole Crown land thing, where a bunch of festivals were interested, but it was like, you can't do this because the government says no. And I think that,
Federally.
Well, I don't know if it was that, but I just know that like it had to be moved to a private site, so it could be run without sort of the interference. Thank God it was. And those trials went really well. I remember, what was the thing they found?
N-ethylpentalone was one of the high-risk substances that was detected.
Yeah, not good.
And I mean, the year before that, there was just really poor quality MDMA, or just a lot of adulterants instead of what people thought they were having.
Yeah, that was good. I remember like when the news stories came out, it was literally toxic substances. And I was like, oh my God, like if we didn't have that testing site, there's no telling what might have happened to those people, but it wouldn't have been enjoyable at the very least. And it was potentially toxic. It was just so good.
Yeah. And I mean, there was the opportunity to educate people and just get them to be monitored if they had, like among their friendship group, already sampled what was then tested.
Yeah, that's great. God, I'm jealous. I wish I was working at that. I was a punter though that year. I didn't visit because the line was so long, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, fair enough. And many people waited more than an hour to get testing done.
Yeah.
So that's something to be aware of. There is the demand when people have the opportunity.
Yeah, definitely.
And you've been sort of Steph, campaigning for this type of thing for many years. You've been through the trials in, I think it was 2019, the last one. So it's a long process to get here. Has it been sort of frustrating for you to have to go through all that and the politics of it?
Look, I jumped on the train decades after other advocates were doing this work. I mean, harm reduction and health rights advocacy has really been going strong since the 1980s. In terms of drug checking advocacy, there's been staunch advocates in Australia for about 25 years, including Dr. David Caldecott, who's the medical consultant of the pilot here in Canberra. But yeah, it was about 2014 when I started doing some advocacy work about drug checking services, and 2016 when I joined the Pill Testing Australia Consortium. And there was about 3 nearly got it off the ground, but at 11 p.m. the day before, something happened, like the permit being pulled because it was on Crown land, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. But, I mean, you kind of... Yeah, like it can be frustrating, but that's part and parcel of advocating for something that only gets accepted in an incremental way. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like something's sort of broken recently, and like on the national front as well. Because like I read the other day, like there was MPs in Queensland pushing for drug checking at festival sites, and I didn't think that would be a thing. Do you know what I mean? Like I wasn't suspecting that Queensland would be sort of asking for this stuff, and it's great to see it's happening.
They've got some great advocates there, and they've got the Conscious Nest that does harm reduction at festivals, and they have advocates with the Loop Australia. So yeah, like I think that I noticed a shift after around 2016. There was a UN meeting, which really kind of shifted the focus of international drug policy to just make sure that health came right into focus. And so, 10 years ago, it was just totally normal to blame people who use drugs for, any of the negative health impacts they experience, despite the fact that there's like social determinants to health that go far beyond just an individual's use. And then, it just kind of has shifted, and it's no longer acceptable to not give a shit about someone's health.
Seems pretty normal that should be accepted as, the basis. But yeah, I suppose these things take time, huh?
And you went overseas and have partaken in a lot of these things around the US and Canada and other places which have been doing this for so long. How was that experience, and what have you learnt from that and to bring back to what we're doing here in Canberra?
Yeah, so I've had some great opportunities to volunteer with organisations like Cosmic Care Association in Portugal, who do the harm reduction services at Boom Festival, and they've had decriminalisation as their drug policy for over 20 years now. And I found the EU approach, there was like an element of or at least in Portugal, it was quite relaxed. And natural that you would be prioritizing someone's health. And then the experiences I had volunteering with anchors at Shambhala Festival in BC, again, they're taking that pragmatic approach, but there is a opioid crisis in North America, and you can really feel the sense of urgency because they were putting up pop-up drug checking services and pop-up consumption spaces anywhere where it was needed. So, yeah.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all around the world, people are kind of united by similar values of health rights and human rights, and then you just have to come up with local, innovative ways to get initiatives across policy lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you think it's kind of like the demand... if that's the case, is just not here or hasn't been here from the people to want this service, do you think? Or kind of like how it doesn't seem like weed legalisation is a forefront issue that everyone's always trying to get to have happen, and so it just kind of hasn't happened. And it's sort of similar maybe to the drug testing, in where we're not having those, like, that scale of epidemic that they're having over there, so it's leading to less people wanting it.
I mean, the death toll from overdose is exceeding the road toll. Like, we do need harm reduction. Yeah, we do need it. I just think that in Australia we have a lot of regulation about everything, including, like, we have very high work health and safety standards in Australia, which is great, but sometimes that can mean that we might have a tendency to over-regulate or be risk adverse when it comes to, like, you know, introducing something that might seem like a novel policy response. Like, Portugal was desperate and they introduced decriminalisation. Canada was desperate and they introduced, like, drug checking services and other initiatives. Like, here in Australia, it's a smaller population, and yeah, we regulate everything and take a really long time to implement something new.
Yeah, and, you know, maybe the urgency factor plays in a little bit, but yeah, it's. And we've got a conservative political landscape for the most part. Maybe that's changing now, but traditionally speaking, it's been quite conservative on the drug policy front. It's nice to see it slowly moving, but yeah, it's nowhere. We've got a lot of catching up to do to some other places around the world, unfortunately. But it's moving. It's moving.
And I guess maybe with what you're doing with Canberra House Social, you're seeing it more firsthand with the events you're running than the average person might be. What have you noticed during sort of your time promoting those sort of events, raves and dance music festivals?
I think our crew has been really fortunate in the sense that we haven't had any serious incidents at our events, but that doesn't mean that we're not observing, a lot of drug use. And, I think that's to be expected in dance music culture. I think drugs are pretty much tied part and parcel to the culture of dance music. But yeah, sort of standing on stage or behind stage sometimes and just looking out at the crowd, you sort of go, right, the drug of choice this evening is not primarily alcohol. And that's, as a promoter, that's really scary. Especially for me, like, when I hadn't had a lot to do with harm minimisation, harm reduction, I was like, wow, this is terrifying. And, I like to think that we're a responsible host and we want to look after people's well-being. And we put in measures even right from the start where we're like, all right, we need electrolytes, like water isn't good enough. Let's look at our first aid kit. Does that actually have the stuff we require if something happens with an overdose or some complications from polydrug use? And we didn't. And there was no one telling us what to do, so we just had to start looking ourselves. And, I can recall several times where looking back with the knowledge that I have now, I went, oh my God, that was serotonin syndrome. I was not in a good way at all. But at the time I had no concept of how bad it was. Or I had really close calls with people at parties, and me not knowing what I know now. I look back on those incidents and like shiver because I was like, that was a run-in with death almost. And I wouldn't have known what to do if someone did drop. I remember this really cool crew from Melbourne called Cool Room.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're great. They came and did a seminar, and it was targeted at promoters like us, and they did Harm Reduction 101. It was like running through the substances and the basic care that you could sort of take to look after people. Mm-hmm. And that was like exploded my brain. I was like, oh my God, I'm not doing enough at my own events. And then further to that, like, when I was going to other events, I was like, why is there not free water here? And I started noticing these things. I was like, why is a bottle of water $7? And that's RSA stuff, right? You'd think it would be totally normal to do. And then on the other side of things, like, I've gone to a lot of raves that are just completely illegal and are done pretty irresponsibly, and at those ones, that's where it becomes really apparent that it's dangerous because it's BYO everything. you're out in the sticks, especially in here in Canberra. It's like when we have doofs or raves, we can go, half an hour out of the city and you're just in straight bush. And those ones, I've gone to a bunch of parties where it was like half an hour walk into site. There's no one sober there, and it just, once it was in my brain, I couldn't get it out. And like, I don't know if you have this when you go to parties now, but like, I just really noticed the basic care. Mm-hmm. And I think in Sydney as well, it was really apparent that it was hard for people to do those things because there was this sort of pervasive culture in Sydney across like security guards and obviously what politicians were saying that, and heavy police presence, that like it was very stigmatized. So you didn't want to advertise at your event that like, here's electrolytes, you need to replace blah, or we've got naloxone here. I think there was a bit of a fear that would put a target on your back.
It can be a double-edged sword where if you're preparing for certain events that may occur, like someone using alcohol or other drugs and needing some kind of health intervention, that can be used against you, possibly to, push the user pays policing fees up, saying that you're promoting drug use. And essentially drug use is just happening everywhere. It's happening where people are home alone as well. Drug use is prevalent all throughout Australia, but when it's happening in an event, when it's happening in a crowd, when it's happening in an isolated area, you just have to factor in different kind of risk mitigation strategies, and you need to be able to talk about it and plan for it without, being persecuted.
That's it. And, I remember when we went, so for CHS, and we went through the process of getting insurance and you really sort of bring ourselves up to this standard where we can actually look after the people at our events. I remember going through that whole process, and one of the questions was like, will there be drugs taken at this event? And I was like, oh, how am I supposed to answer that? And that was in the questionnaire for our insurance, and that was terrifying. And they didn't ask what harm reduction steps have you taken if people are taking drugs. It was, do people use drugs at your event? Which was a really bizarre thing to ask and scared the crap out of me, to be honest. And it just goes to show, like, insurers, venues, they're all looking at this stuff. They do notice. And if you're being proactive and really communicating to your audience, that, it is a double-edged sword, like you said, where you can get yourself in trouble. Or, you might not get that venue. You might not get that space. You might not be able to insure yourself. And that's the thing about insuring your events. You've got to be honest with your insurer. Otherwise, when it comes to claim time, it could be a big problem. So it's complicated.
And I find with events, the one thing that is predictable is the unpredictability. You might be able to reasonably say someone will be using alcohol or other drugs at my event, especially if you've got a liquor license and you're actually serving alcohol. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have any sense of what substance is being used. Drug trends change. They change over time, and then the drug market changes quite quickly. And if substances are being sold as things that are different from what they actually are, a person might think they're taking a stimulant and then end up dropping on the dance floor if it's like actually a depressant drug. So it's a little bit difficult to be able to predict like what exact individual behaviors are going to be occurring at your festival.
It's tricky. It's very tricky.
Off topic a little bit. Did you guys see the Woodstock 99 doco?
Oh my God.
When you mentioned water just before, that made me think of that, how they were taking people's water bottles and look what happened.
Oh my God.
Can I just say, I really remember that event when it was happening because there was some like live streams. And it was... That to me kind of shows like how important it is to like have values and put out comms with like what are the expectations of our patrons beforehand, because you can't really force a person to drink water, but you can put provisions in there. But you can kind of shape a person's attitude like as they're deciding to go to your event, and like shape the attitude of your patrons by like, providing them with shade and comfort and things like that, like curating their experience and making it easier for people to prioritize their self-care.
Yeah, I think, first of all, that was a disaster, that festival. Oh, my God.
So
And-
what not to do rule book like for events?
I watched that and Fire Festival, and I got chills because I was like, oh, this could be what happens if I don't do my job well. But yeah, and it just shows disregard for the people that go. It's profit over people, really. And that's really, it shouldn't be what events are about. Like, a good event planner would be considering how all of this stuff impacts the people that are going. And, like Steph said, like Canberra House Social takes a special care to sort of curate the people that come to our event. And you do that by putting your comms out. And, we've created a culture at our own events where we haven't had an incident. And it's because the people that come know what's expected of them, what we'll give them. And yeah, you sort of... You watch events like that, and it's just like, we're going to slap all of these disparate bands together in this massive place, and there was like no infrastructure. There was nothing to make people comfy. Oh, man.
Although with that said, like that documentary didn't dive into like what harm reduction measures were in place for the original 69 Woodstock.
Right.
And there were some rough things going on then as well. But there was also, the beginnings of psychedelic harm reduction. And I think that was being maybe delivered by Hell's Angels. But
my God.
yeah, like
Really?
just a different time, a different place. But yeah.
Leading
man.
the way.
Yeah. Did stuff actually catch on fire? I missed that part of the doco. Like, was stuff on fire?
Yeah, it did. I am amazed that more people weren't injured. Seriously.
I know. I was thinking the same thing. I was waiting for that statistic to come, like, at the end, but it was kind of like it didn't happen. And I don't know how.
Yeah. It's funny, like, think about, like, Astroworld, that Travis Scott incident. It's like, the people in front of microphones do you not realize that the power that you have? Like,
I don't actually know the incident you're referring to. What
Really?
happened? What went down?
well, there was. I'll paraphrase here because I don't know all of the stuff. But Travis Scott was at a concert called Astroworld, which was his brand, so it was essentially his concert. And when he jumped on stage, he said some stuff, and like, you could be interpreted as inciting a riot, I think. Anyhow, there was a crowd crush, and unfortunately a bunch of people died. And yeah, it's awful. It's a disaster. But yeah, it was just sort of like, do you not realize when you're in front of a mic and there's a lot of people there, you've got to like put that harm reduction message out? Like, like, look after everyone in the crowd. If someone drops, we're going to stop playing the music until they come back up again. They're looked after. And it just was not done in that case.
That's a really good point, and that's something I would love to advocate to the musicians out there, that, it means so much to members of the crowd as well when you just say, hey, stop for a minute. Have you got water? Take a sip. Or like, promoting, hey, there's harm reduction services on site. There's the first aid tent. They can curate that health focused experience as well. And the crowd really care because they are there to see the artists. It's kind of like, if you're doing harm reduction services at a festival, you do have great experiences with the crowd, but you're kind of like that person being like, hey, have you had a sip of water? And it's kind of like your mum coming along being like, should you be doing that? But when it's like the artist that you idolize saying, hey, stop and care about yourself and care about the people around you, it can have a great, it can shift the mentality, it can shift the vibe.
Totally. And like, I think to a lot of artists' credit, I do see that a lot,
Awesome.
like if there's a crush and a mosh, like it might be the heaviest band that you can think of and they still sort of say, just stop. Like, we're going to stop the music. I will not play until those people get up. And, it shows that they care. And, that's the thing. You recognize the power you have. Like, you're in front of a microphone. There might be tens of thousands of people there. You just saying, hey, stop for a second, or giving people the heads up, like, go and drink some water. Look after the women in the crowd, which is something that, I think has been really good to hear recently. Gigs I've gone to is like, we're all here to look after each other, which is, obviously that strikes at my heart because that's what I want people to do. But it's nice to see when that's sort of brought up by these artists, everyone immediately sort of goes into this mode of caring for the people around them. And yeah, it's like setting a culture. And, you know, one artist does that. And then for the rest of the day, those people might be thinking, oh, like someone's fallen over, I should help them up.
Yeah, some harm reduction messages are easier to like say, like, you know, because everyone would agree, like, hey, chill out for a moment. People are getting crushed. Have some water, because everyone needs water no matter what they're doing. You know, looking out for each other if there's any incidents relating to gender-based violence. You know, taking a break. All those like important messages and general harm reduction messages. But when it comes to talking specifically about drug-related harm reduction messages, then you're dealing with that double-edged sword again, where you don't want to be, you know, outing that you can clearly see in the crowd, like some dilated pupils or whatever.
Yeah, that's it. Like, especially places where there's cops inside the event, you don't want to be like, look at all these munted people right over here. Do you know what I mean? And that's, you know, I'll save my comments about cops inside music festivals for another day, but, you know, it's not a great environment to have. And like, yeah, you know, I can't imagine an artist getting up and being like, here's the things you should do if you're on Molly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would love if they did, but I don't think it's going to happen. But, you know, it's good that we can, you know, especially with dance-wise, like my experience with that was so organic and normal. And I didn't, you know, it wasn't like, hey, come over here, are you being safe? It was that the trips hit chart, like, because I was tripping and I was like, oh my God, what is this gigantic banner? And there was such a low, like a really organic way to engage people, because no one came up and hassled me. After I'd been standing there for like 5 minutes, they're like, do you need any help? I was like, yes, I do. And that felt really natural to me. And then later, I think when I was at Strawberry, I didn't use it, but a friend of mine had used the sort of chill out space out the back because they were having a bad time. I just felt so natural as well. So it was just like, oh, I don't know if you need to see an ambulance or not. And I was kind of leaning on the side of yes. But, you know, we were heading that way, and then we walked past the tent. We were like, oh, okay, we'll talk to these guys. And, you know, it stopped us from having to leave the festival because it was only day one. It was so good. And once this person had calmed down, had some water, stopped being overloaded by stimulus, they were feeling a lot better, and we returned to the party. And that just felt right. Like I think that's the thing. It's like, I wish that part was more readily accessible everywhere, because it's just natural. And I think once people recognized that, you know, like 2 days in, it was like, oh, I can go here. Like word started spreading around. It only takes that happening more often for people to sort of expect it. And that's, like I was saying before, I want that here.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the cool things about services like DanceWise and Consciousness is that you can have those really specific drug education conversations, but it is a holistic service, and it's there for anyone that's feeling overwhelmed, or if you know, kind of dehydrated, need some electrolytes, and you know, a trend that, you know, we're all dealing with COVID still, and for many people it's really overwhelming being in crowds again.
For sure.
And yeah, you can get some emotional support as well.
Yeah, I think that's, especially for people that might be on psychedelics, sometimes it's just that emotional support that they might need. I think, you know, doing psychedelics at parties and festivals can be a bit full on sometimes. It's so nice, you know, it's so nice to have someone that's just willing to offer to do that for someone else. You know, I've been at parties where people will do that off their own back themselves, but you can't rely on that, obviously. So having services that can provide that intervention step between hospitalisation is so good. And obviously it breaks down that, you know, there's still people I know that are afraid of going to talk to the ambos because they think, one, they're going to get kicked out of the festival, and two, maybe they'll be judged for using drugs. So it's nice to have that intervention step now. Obviously not everywhere, but, you know, it's New South Wales and Victoria run a lot of festivals. So it does make sense that it's in those places first. but I'm jealous.
I mean, one of the fundamental values to harm reduction is non-judgmentalism. So, and something else that's different when it comes to harm reduction services compared to a step up if you're going to the first aid and medical tent is that you're not actually receiving treatment. You're just essentially being like provided with the space to do what you need to do to prioritize your own self-care. It's, you're not going there to get any kind of treatment. It's not a counseling service. It's essentially just a space where you can be empowered to care for yourself.
That's great. Need more of them.
And let's talk about the Canberra facility a bit. How has the first month gone, and what are your first impressions, your vibe from the place, the experience that people are having? What's your first month's reaction? Yeah,
really good vibes. I don't know. Like I said earlier, I love going to work there. Like I actually, how many people can say that? It's like, yeah, I'm stoked to go into work.
It's really cool as well. It's cool to see. Like, I mean, even if you were going in to just check out the service and learn more, I think you can still get something out of it, even if you didn't have a sample to go get checked out.
Totally.
The equipment is really cool. And it's different from the festival. The festival, there was a lot, like you were saying before, Mitch, there was a queue. That still did an awesome job getting lots of people through the service, but it's a little bit more chill at the fixed site, and so you have a bit more time, and there's like an even fancier machine there.
It's so fancy. No, and like the other thing I've been loving is like we're a multidiscipline team, so we're from, obviously the sort of right places, but it's Pill Testing Australia, CHAMA, which does harm reduction and advocacy, Harm Reduction Australia, and then Directions. So it's like this big group of people that work together a lot. But the team that we've sort of put together now is so nice. And I forgot to mention ANU chemists. But it's just, everyone's got the same goal. They just want to help people look after their own health. We're getting along really well. I think like I think a lot of people might have ideas of what's going on in the drug market, and I think I think we'll find at the end of this that we're probably getting the data that's really reflective of what's going on. And it's too soon to say, obviously, but it goes to show like it's hard to do these studies where you figure out what's actually happening in the market. And I think being here now, we'll get that data, and that's obviously going to help inform the ANU and the service itself as to how better to help people. Like we have, meetings and we just discuss how to make the service better. And, there's a lot of drive to sort of help people with anything that sort of might crop up. So, there's a nurse there at the service. So doing that sort of opportunistic healthcare where we can sort of help people with other issues as they come up. So, and it's all free as well. So
like STI checks, you could get a blood test done, check for hepatitis C, minor wound care. It's quite comprehensive.
Yeah, so it's been nice, and like, everyone that comes through, I'd like to say really interested. I think that's the thing that I've noticed a lot is we find it so cool. We're drug nerds, but I think it is interesting to stand there and look at the graphs and the machines running and have the chemical analysts tell you exactly what's going on, because that's novel. People don't get that. Even if you were doing reagent testing and stuff like that, it's never going to give you the amount of information that we can get from the two machines that we have. And then, I think, it might awaken some stuff in people where they get really interested in the topic. Like I've certainly noticed a lot of people sort of talking about harm reduction more since the service has gotten up and running. And that's what we want. I'd love for it to get to the point where people are planning to go and check their stuff as part of their plan to go out to a festival. Do you know what I mean? Like
or plan to use in any context.
Totally. But like, forming that sort of plan to, all right, I can go here at that time and I can get my stuff checked, and then I'll know for the weekend or whenever it is they use. I can't wait for it to sort of reach that saturation point where it just becomes like, I hope we're too busy.
It's a really cool like point of contact that we have with people who use drugs as well, because the majority of people who use drugs don't necessarily need any kind of health intervention at all throughout their life, or they only need some kind of intervention when something goes really wrong, like, that there's an overdose, there's some kind of drug-related harm, they need to go to hospital, or, they're getting to a point where they might need some kind of treatment or support. And it's people usually wait about 5 years or more to access any kind of treatment after they first, start contemplating it. So we have the opportunity to influence someone's drug-taking career, if you will, and we're not like promoting abstinence. We're essentially just encouraging people to minimize the risk of harm, so you can get those kind of hacks and tips early on to avoid, what could be lifelong harm.
Totally. I wish I had that when I was 18, because I would just think back to things that happened and I was like, damn, I wish I knew. But yeah, it's awesome to be able to put that in place. It's incredible.
And what's the mood of the people coming in? What sort of numbers are you getting at this stage, by the way? Like, it's open 2 nights a week.
I don't know if we can share actual numbers.
Yeah.
But look, we're open for 3 hours. There's usually a team of between 4 to 5 people. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're run off our feet most services.
Yeah.
I'm sure there'll be ebbs and flows, but
Yeah.
like, I would hazard a guess that I'd say we've been pretty busy. And considering it was not a huge launch, it's really encouraging to see that the message is filtering out to the community, obviously. And I think that's the thing about word of mouth. It will spread slowly, but it is getting out there, I feel. I love being busy there. Like, I love seeing more people come through the door. But yeah, I hope it picks up. I hope we can do more days. It's all dependent. We've obviously got to finish this 6-month trial. Well, not trial, but finish this 6-month period and then see where the service goes from there. Be really exciting. And there's obviously the evaluation that the ANU is doing too. And they'll have some suggestions, and, we'll learn a little bit more about what people want from the service from that, which I think is really important, to ask the community what they want, and like how we can improve it.
Yeah, because it's only open 3 hours on a Thursday morning, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., and 3 hours on a Friday night. 6 till 9?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and so like the two main tests take different amounts of time. So I mean, if we started to get more people, we might do things like prioritize who gets what tested how. Like the first machine can produce results within a few minutes, and then the step up can take at least 10 minutes up to 30 minutes. So yeah, we'd have contingencies on how we could streamline the service delivery if we needed to speed things up. But at the moment, we're consistently doing stuff and able to take more time with people and offer them additional tests, or offer them, referrals, and have those kind of educational conversations as well.
Yeah. Like, I've been taking the opportunity to hand out naloxone as much as possible,
Yes.
but I might slow up now because there will be a shortage across the world soon, unfortunately, which really sucks, because naloxone is a opioid overdose reversal agent. So if you're overdosing on opioids, there's a really simple fix now that doesn't involve any needles and can be applied by anyone. And like the training that you give for that, a brief intervention can be, really short and sharp, which means you can use, I've been using downtime while we're waiting for one test to sort of say, hey, do you know what naloxone is? Because thankfully, numbers here from opioid overdose are not as bad as in some other countries, but it is something that we're concerned about. So being able to put naloxone out into the community as much as possible is a great thing to do. And, it doesn't take long. And it's one of those things you can just shove in your cupboard and just hope that you never have to pick it out. But, it's there if you need to, which is really nice.
Yeah, and I mean, it can be a addition to anyone's first aid kit. The majority of fatal opioid overdoses are actually from prescription opioids, and the opioid overdose rate is on the increase and has been for the last decade or so. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, I like when we run our events, I'll usually take quite a few units along and just hand them out because I just want it to proliferate. And it's nice to see. I think that message is starting to spread really well, which is good. It is such an easy thing to have in your party kit. It'd be great if we could get more out into the community, honestly. But yeah, obviously I hope no one has to use it, but these are the things.
Yep.
And without going into specifics, are you getting a lot of interesting things coming up and people returning or destroying or deciding that's not what it was? Is that happening a lot?
I think, again, like we can't share specifics. I think there's a process we have to follow with this stuff. But I will say that I've been very interested. And I think broadly speaking, we have seen some like novel psychoactive substances, which have been probably more on the surprising end, or at least for me. And I think maybe you could say broadly we've seen stuff that would be consistent with what you'd see at a music festival. But, I'm always surprised by what we get, honestly, just because, we get stats from organisations that, look at the sewage or run studies and ask drug users what do they use. But it's a different thing entirely to actually seeing what's produced. And I think I've said this before, but, it's fascinating to see, if I'm not talking about the compounds themselves, there is a lot of different types of filler that we're seeing in a lot of powders and pills and you name it. And that's always super interesting because obviously there's a bit of like folklore around, how many times have you heard someone say, oh, there's rat poison in pills? Do you know what I mean? Or something of that ilk.
Or like, this is the really good Coke. You can tell because it makes you really numb. And then it's like, or is it spiked with lidocaine?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, I think like, I don't know, we're so far removed from the production source of cocaine specifically that, I think it's really fraught, that one. And it's very interesting getting samples and sort of looking at that stuff. One of the machines that we have at the site is called a UPLC, and it can do purity tests, and that's quite revealing sometimes. It can be, for the person coming in, they might have an idea of maybe they've used it before, and they're like, oh, okay, I think it's this strong based on my own personal body and experience. And then we run the test, and it might say, we try and break it down into 3 distinct groups, so low, medium, and high purity, so we're not giving a number to stuff. I think that can be really surprising to people sometimes. And it on a personal level, like if that was me, I would be looking at that and going, right, maybe I need to adjust the dose that I was looking at taking. So it's a helpful thing to have for people. But I'm sure this is the thing about this site. There's going to be unexpected stuff that comes up for people, and that can be really confronting. But I dare say that will be a theme forever. There'll be times where people are going, I think it's X or Y, and it's not at all. It's actually Z. Or they might think, oh, this powder or pill or whatever I've got is really potent, and we might run a test and go, actually, it's not. And that might lead to like conversations like, what else is going on with you? Or was it something else that you took that potentially didn't interact well or made you feel like that was really potent?
And that will always be the case when you're dealing with an unregulated market.
That's it. It's like, there is no control over this stuff. The only control that we can put in place is letting people know what the stuff is, which is obviously really good and will have flow-on effects, but it's hard to say how.
And like the drug checking services, one thing, but there are a number of like systems that are being developed across Australia to release information like drug alerts. There's quite well-established systems in New South Wales, I think WA and Victoria.
Yeah.
But all of this is part of like systems that are being built up to triangulate any kind of drug-related data that is available and, produce warnings that could be given to health professionals so they're aware of trends, or in the general public if there's something especially dangerous. So all of this is, slowly building up, and I hope it continues.
Yeah, same. I remember, have you seen those, when I was in Amsterdam last, I saw DIMS had billboards up. So, the like the LCD ones or whatever they are, and it was like, look out for this particular batch of pill. And I was like, oh my God, you can do that here? I'd love to get to that point where we can start saying public alert messages, imagine having a billboard out in Civic somewhere that just said, watch out for this.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about the DIM system is that they've been operating for 30 years, and there's about 30 different drug checking sites across the Netherlands, and then they're feeding into the wider EU system. And so, the more data you have, the more the more you're able to triangulate that information and just monitor what's going on across the market. So as great as it is to have like one-off pilots, you just really need to invest in more, like get that coverage and get that longitudinal data as well.
Have you seen is it Know Your Stuff in NZ? Their drug checking queue. I checked their website the other day and they have like a pill library. Have you seen that?
I've checked out some of their stuff.
It's so cool. So they'll have like their technicians, when they're testing the drugs, they'll often take a photo and they'll take it on this little sheet of paper and they add it to their library. And there's stuff that makes it into the library that I won't say safe, but is not unexpected. And then there's stuff in their library that's like, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like this one. This is the most recent one I saw. Look at that. 180 milligrams of MDMA. I remember when they posted that on their Instagram, they were like, this one makes our naughty list because it had more than what one dose of MDMA would usually be. But it's stuff like this. This takes me back to, the forums and
Blue
all the
light.
Yeah. Like that was, people have been doing this stuff forever on the DIY front. But obviously it's great because these guys are able to do the testing and tell you why it's in the thing instead of relying on like anecdotal reporting, which honestly is also super cool that people were doing that and going, here's what I found. And, that was one of my first experiences with harm reduction, was looking at those forums and going, oh my God, like people are sharing their experiences. People would write down like, they'd write a journal of while they were high, they were writing what the effects they were feeling, the strength as it felt to them and all this sort of stuff. And that was like revolutionary for me. I was like, wow, you can do that. I used that information myself, which, was a bit fraught. Like, you don't know who these people are, but for the most part, it was all done in good spirit and good faith. And it was all done to sort of look after people. But
it's like, why not have scientific precision as well?
Yeah. That's what, when I saw that, I was like, that's so cool. It's like blue light, except with FTIR or UPLC, which is, the machines that we use. But yeah, it's phenomenal.
That actually leads quite nicely into one of the questions we got, which was, will they, as in the Canberra testing site, post results of sort of bad batches going around and potentially advising people not to take them? But it sounds like not yet.
Well, so the system that Steph was referring to, the drug alert system, has been up and running. It usually goes through the health departments of the states where it's active. Canberra's a bit different, and we haven't had. I'm happy to be wrong here, but I'm going out on a limb and saying I don't think we've had any drug alerts being sent out through ATT Health itself. And I think now I don't know the specifics of this, but I believe there's an agreement that's been made so that we can share really, if we were to come across something really toxic, it is going to be communicated.
From the clinic.
from CanTest, all the information goes to ACT Health.
Yes.
And then,
Yes. So it's really
They'll
up to
decide.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, that is sort of one of the foundational things about the service is we're sharing our data with ACT Health so they can call the shots. But my understanding is alerts will get out to people. And it's really up to ACT Health to sort of decide what triggers that. But, I think we can sort of confidently say that will be happening.
And if you follow the New South Wales health alerts as well, and the Victorian, follow all the different state and territory Department of Health drug alerts, because if a trend is happening in one part of Australia, it might be happening in Canberra as well.
Totally.
So,
Yeah. And there's DanceWise does this really well. I love DanceWise, obviously consciousness, high grounds. There's all these really Instagram's the place to go. There's so many, and I follow people from across the world, but they're really good at sharing this info so that you don't have to, because that's the thing. The New South Wales drug alerts, the Vic drug alerts, they're a website, and unless you're diligent, you're not checking that, and Steph and I are probably lucky enough to get emails in our inboxes through work that say, oh my God, there's a thing. But, regular punter Joe is not going to have access to that. So following DanceWise, High Ground, Consciousness, or, a bunch of different orgs like that, they'll put it in their story. So you'll just be cruising Instagram and you'll get the alert and you don't have to do the digging. I would suggest that. And, hopefully once our system is up and running and alerts are coming out, we'll start sharing that stuff as well, which would be really good. And it's definitely worth keeping an eye out for, because it's, if there is an alert out, there's usually a pretty good reason that they've done that. It's not a low bar to put these things out.
Yeah, definitely Instagram, I agree. There's a lot of great stuff out there. So that's the DanceWise Vic, DanceWise New South Wales. You said High Ground already. Yep.
Consciousness. Yeah.
And
Give them
Cool
all a
Room.
follow.
You mentioned them earlier.
Yeah, Cool Room's great. Yeah, there's once you start digging into it, you'll get a lot of stuff. Once you start following these things, you might get the algorithm feeding you stuff. But, that's a really simple sort of low effort way to get this information. Just watching their stories, they feed great information out.
And supplement the information that's released by the health department with tailored harm reduction tips, which can include things use this type of reagent if you do at-home reagent drug checking, because different types of reagents can be used to seek out the presence of different kinds of substances, and you can buy those kits online from a number of different organizations like Dance Safe, and there's ones in Australia too.
Yeah, totally. I think as well, the drug alert system that they had over in New Zealand, there was an alert that went out a month or two ago, and there was some cocaine that had either been tainted or missold that had a bit of fentanyl in it, and it put quite a few people in hospital, if I remember.
17, I think.
Yeah, which is that's unheard of, right? At least on our end of the world, to have an event like that where it's just such a huge spike in numbers, that was pretty scary. But it goes to show that alert system, not only did it alert the people in New Zealand about what was going on, but we heard about it, and New Zealand's not far away, so it's that sort of thing. You've got to sort of be clued into the data sources where you can get the info, and once that's there, everyone does share, and it is something you've got to keep an eye on. I think especially in regards to fentanyl, it's I don't know how frequently it's happening here, but certainly not as bad as America and South America, but we've got to keep our eyes on it. Sincerely hope it doesn't sort of crop up here, but that's what this drug alert system can really combat quite well is, I think everyone, if you got that message in New Zealand and you grabbed a bag of Coke that weekend, you might have gone, I'm either not going to take this or I'm going to get it checked. And that's the great part about the alert and also the systems that you have to test fentanyl. There is stuff that you can get that you can test it yourself. You don't need a fancy machine.
Does CHAMA have the fentanyl testing strips?
Yeah, we do. Totally. I have them. Yeah, we have heaps. If you're looking for stuff, you can drop by CHAMA in Belconnen. Directions Health also has it, and at the drug checking site, we've also got them. I don't know if we can give them out, but we can definitely do the testing. So you can drop by, and we can actually, I think that's probably a really good thing to note as well, is they're not so easy to use. I wish they were a little bit easier, but if you're shown by the chemist how to use it, that's really all you need. Like, you'd be able to pick it up afterwards.
We've all got used to the COVID tests now.
It's the same thing. It's got the two lines, the C and the T. But I hope we don't have to upscale our fentanyl sort of stuff. But it's always there and waiting. I think we're not unprepared, which is nice.
Awesome. We'll get to a few more of the questions. If you are listening live or watching live, there's still time, but we're gonna get through the ones we've got. Let's go with if the sample are what you thought they were, do you get them back?
I'll let you answer this one.
So you only need to provide a very small amount of the drug. Like it's like way less than what you'd put on a bump spoon, I guess, depending on the size of your bump spoon. But it's just like a pinky toenail or less than that. And so no, but you get, like, if you were bringing in a gram, a baggie, and you only took out the tiniest amount, that's tested, but you get to choose, depending on the results, whether you want to discard whatever else you've got on you.
Yeah, I think it's, from memory, the posters that we have up inside the thing say between 1 to 2 milligrams, but it does depend on the substance. Some of the guides we've been saying is just like, if it's the very sort of end of the bag, there's almost nothing left in it at all, that sort of is enough. And no, you wouldn't get that back. But, we're taking the smallest amount possible to run the tests. And 1 to 2 milligrams will get us through FTIR and UPLC. It might not be enough to do any further testing, but that sort of will get it through that suite.
And another question, kind of the opposite of that, if you do decide to discard the drugs, what do you do with them, and what does the service do with them?
So they're discarded. So they're sort of kept in a secure place, and then they're handed over to, I believe, ACGAL. Is that right?
Well, I think it might just go in a biohazard bin and get destroyed.
Yeah.
Or maybe samples every sample goes to ACGAL for the records, but are we talking about discarding a whole sort of baggie?
It's hard to read from the question, but I'm assuming that they've decided, no, this is toxic, I don't want to take it. What happens to it?
Yeah, it just gets destroyed. I think that's the simplest way to sort of say it. If it's, there's times that we might look for a further investigation where it'll go through to a third round of testing called GCMS, but that's not part of this suite. It's probably just best to say it gets destroyed. And there's nothing kept in the lab for longer than service, essentially. So it all gets destroyed quite promptly. If that's, people want to drop the stuff they're not keen on, it's a good place to do it. If you could feasibly even use a service just to be like, I don't want this. We're more than happy to do that. It is a secure way to get rid of them. And you're not going to, that's the thing. We're really stressing that it's it's a friendly, welcoming place. You don't have to come in and get your stuff tested. You could just come in and chat to us. Destruction is something that we can do for you.
Another one, we probably can't do this right now, but can we see examples of some results? What would someone see if they were to go in and get it?
What would the equipment actually show them?
Yeah, what results does it give? And is it a piece of paper? Do you take home a printout, or what do you get?
You're looking mostly at laptop screens.
Yeah, and for I think at least for FTIR, we're looking at a graph essentially that will have peaks and dips in it. And I think the simplest way to explain it is, and how the chemical analysts usually explain it, is that we're looking at a fingerprint. So it's shaking some molecules around, and it's going to create a graph on the spectrum, and then they're sort of looking to match that result to a library, which is pretty extensive from what I understand, and it's collated from different sources all around the world. And a lot of the time we're not, you don't need to be looking at these things. People love to look at them because they're interesting.
Very cool.
But, the analysts will go through it all with you, and they're the ones that are trained to review these graphs and sort of look at the machinery and understand what's happening. So yourself, you're probably going to see some stuff on the screen, but it may not make sense or mean much to you, but the analysts will tell you quite specifically what they know and they see. And that'll differ across the two machines. They'll give you different readouts. And from that point, we don't hand out anything to you that's like a printout. It's more like a conversation, honestly. Or at least sort of that's what I've seen so far.
Awesome. That's pretty much all the pill testing questions. There are a few other questions which I'll just throw at you, but unrelated. The worst trouble you got into as a kid?
Define trouble.
I took out my car before I had my learner's plates. So snuck out, took the car my parents had got me a Volvo, and they were like, "This is what you will learn on." And I was like, "Cool." But I was taking it out all the time. And I remember a time I took it out to pick up a mate from Civic. I was too young to go out. And my dad called me. It was like 3 a.m. I was like, that can't be good. That's the worst thing I've done and got in trouble for. It was a very long drive home.
So I was very well behaved. And when I went to a festival called Alpine Unity in Canterbury, my friends were all wanting to take ecstasy. And I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do anything illegal. And I don't know if you're familiar, but New Zealand has an interesting relationship with novel psychoactive substances where you could actually get a number of drugs, including things which technically are not novel psychoactive substances like salvia or Mexican tripping weed. And I went to parties where different types of novel amphetamine type substances were handed out like you would get promo people handing out Red Bull. And so my friends all took their illegal ecstasy from New Zealand, which was probably just sugar anyway, because there have been lulls in the drug market. And I took this thing that was legal called Wormies, and it actually contained ketamine and PCP or something like this. And I was awake all night and learned. I did not learn before I gunned. So, yeah.
Amazing. And finally, when was the last time you cried? maybe at work, maybe on a trip, who knows?
Oh my god! I need to count this down in minutes. I'm like a cats and dogs on the internet, shed a tear kind of person on a daily basis. Happy tears most of the time, but yeah.
I think it was last time I tripped, actually. So there you go. Got very emotional about something I saw in my brain. So, yeah, I'm not a frequent crier. They're cute, cats and dogs, but they don't might force my partners to tears, but not me.
Awesome. Well, that's all the questions we've got from the listeners. I guess I would be interested in one more question from me, Steph, that I did ask Mitch in our documentary, that all this talk about pill testing often gets asked, is it a good thing to be making drugs safer for people to take?
I mean, it really depends on your philosophical sort of angle. I think it's good to be prioritizing health. I don't think you are actually promoting drug use by implementing harm reduction measures, because I don't think people could get any more on it if they tried. Drug use is really prevalent, and unfortunately so is drug-related harm. harm reduction just reduces the harm. So like the opposite to harm reduction is harm maximization, and I'm not down for that. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much both for taking some time to come and chat to us in the flats. I've linked in the description there for how to find more information about the pill testing and stuff. But yeah, we'll let you guys go, and thank you for popping in and joining the flats.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.